13, wow, I showed up all of a sudden. Business meeting of the Washington County Board of Education. I'd like to call the meeting to order. We have a quorum of members present. Today we are thrilled to welcome the Life Skills class from Mogginsville Elementary to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So, boys and girls, if you go to the microphone. Thank you, everyone. Before you go anywhere, if your teachers could introduce themselves to us and then tell us who the boys and girls are that you brought today.
My name is Kimberly, and I'm the primary life skills teacher, and this is Polly Ailing, which is the intermediate life skills teacher. And this is a mixture of both. We have Ivy Humboldt from my class.
Hi, Ivy.
And then we have Carson Bowles.
Hi, Carson.
From Mrs. A's class. And Jordan Bishop from Mrs. A's class. Katie Crabtree and her sister Brittany Crabtree are both in Mrs. A's class. And Audrey Villalora from Mrs. A's class as well. And then we also have the assistants in my class, Sandy Harper and Lynette Adams.
Thank you all for bringing them here. Thank you for the work you did to prepare for doing this. Clearly you practiced, which is great. I want to thank as well the parents, grandparents, everybody else who brought these kids here. I can hardly think of a better way to start our board meeting, especially on National Education Week, than having these boys and girls lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So thank you so much, and we wish you all the best in the rest of the school year.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other board members have other guests or students they'd like to introduce today? No?
Parents, you're not required to stay for the whole meeting. If you want to get up and go home with your students, feel free. I know some of you are looking like, can I go? Yes. Thank you all. Thank you for the work.
Just watch that guy with the Ravens hat and the Steelers jacket that they don't get into it in the parking lot, all right?
I would also note that the Mogginsville principal, Mrs. Newcomer, was here this evening with her students.
Thank you, Dr. Newcomer. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Fisher. Is there any discussion or amendments to the agenda? If not, all those in favor of approving the agenda? Are there any opposed? Motion passes 7-0 and the student member concurs. Approval minutes?
Mr. President, I move for the adoption minutes from the previous meeting and also from the dates were a work session on November the 5th. We also had a closed session on Tuesday, November the 5th, and the business meeting November the 5th. So we're moving for approval of a packet of 3 sets of minutes.
Motion approved by Mr. Bailey. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Are there any comments, corrections, or amendments to the minutes? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes? Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next is public comment. We haven't had anybody who has signed up to speak. Is there anybody who's here today who'd like to speak? Sure, Ms. Fry.
Good evening, Dr. Wilcox,
Good evening.
Dr. Harding, board members, student board. I have a few prepared notes, but I'm just going to briefly share. At some point this evening, you're going to begin a conversation involving 403B plans and the 437 plans. I think before you proceed, I don't know where you're going to land this evening. I don't know if it's an action item. I don't know if you're planning to make a decision this evening. I think the primary reason I'm here is I would like to make a request that before you make a decision, that you survey the participants who are in the plans. Currently, the report, it's about an 85-page report. I've skimmed through it. I did sit in on the last finance meeting. About 600 of your employees participate in 403B plans. We are not, by any chance, some of us may be, but most of us are not financial experts. That's not our background. It's not our job. What we do bring to the table, however, is the dollars. It is our money that we are investing. It does go through your payroll plan. Our payroll comes out of payroll deduction. But ultimately, it is our money. And I think it would behoove you to seek the input from those individuals who are investing in these plans. What do they want? I can share with you my thoughts, but they would be my thoughts and my thoughts alone. I currently am sitting on 2 plans. When you made a change 6 years ago, it was not financially prudent for me to move the one plan over. I have subsequently learned, however, that the present plan is a plan that I'm actually doing fairly well in because of one key factor. The fees that are assessed on that plan are at a much lower rate than the fees on my other plan. That would be what I would say to you would be my opinion. I want a fiscally responsible plan at a good price. I'm one of 600. I believe that the 600 would probably like to share with you what they would like. And you've got a pretty comprehensive report. You've talked with 2 different experts in this area. You've had staff look at this. I would appreciate if you would consider also surveying what the needs of your employees would be, or the wishes of your employees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fry. Anybody wish to offer any comments in response briefly? If not, we'll move on to the next item, which is special recognition. We have a resolution that's been approved by the board, and I'd like to just spend a moment and read it. It says, whereas public schools are the backbone of our democracy, providing young people with the tools they need to maintain our nation's precious values of freedom, civility, and equality. And whereas by equipping young Americans with both practical skills and broader intellectual abilities, schools give them hope for and access to a productive future. And whereas the week prior to Thanksgiving has historically been set aside as National Education Week, and the Wednesday of American Education Week has been designated National Education Support Personnel Day. And whereas all education employees, be they custodians or secretaries, teachers or assistants, work tirelessly to serve our children and communities with care and professionalism. And whereas schools are community cornerstones bringing together adults, children, educators, and volunteers, business leaders and elected officials in a common enterprise. And whereas support must be given to educators and education support personnel as they continue to strengthen education in their schools and communities to make public schools great for every child. Therefore, be it resolved that the week of November 18th through the 22nd will be observed as National Education Week, and that Wednesday, November 20th in particular, will be observed as National Education Support Personnel Day in the Washington County Public Schools. And this is signed by all of the members of the board, the student member, as well as Dr. Wilcox. We do this in recognition, obviously, of National Education Week. It's fitting that as some of my colleagues like to remind me, if you're an educator, if you're married to an educator, every day is Education Day. And it brings to mind, to me, just how many people our schools touch every day. In addition to the 22-some thousand students, the 3,000 employees, the parents of those students, the loved ones, our schools touch probably half of the county every single day. And it's because of the work of the educational leaders who are represented by the A&S group that are the leaders both at the school level and in this building. It's due to the teachers who are every day working with students at what I call the point of service, and the support personnel who make sure every day that students are at school safely, that they have a clean, welcoming place to go to school, that the phones are answered when parents, and I'm one of those parents who calls with concerns or questions, and who make sure that the kids have all the support services they need to be ready to learn when they're in that classroom. So on behalf of the board, I would like to welcome Ms. Fry, Mary Ann, and Cheryl, excuse me for being, Anne Marie, I'm sorry, come forward and receive one of these on behalf of the board. And please know how much the board appreciates what you do and what the thousands of employees that you all represent do to make Washington County a great place to work every day.
Everybody has anything to say, you're welcome to.
Thank you.
If any board members have anything they want to add? Next on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Special item under that report. Did I skip something?
No,
Okay,
we just did it. Oh, so you want to talk about the review of the 403B plan?
that's the next
That's
item.
just, I thought you said special. We have a review this evening of the 403B and 457 benefit plans. We do have a senior consultant from Bolton Partners here. That is Mike Bizowski. Close? I'm sorry, Mike. And joining Chris South at the table will be our supervisor of employee benefits, Regina Keller. Regina, thank you for joining us this evening. Chris, if you will lead this off, we'll get started.
Certainly. It is my pleasure and Gina's pleasure also this evening to introduce Mr. Mike Wiskowski. Mike is a senior consultant with Bolton Partners Investment Consulting Group in Baltimore. Mike is going to review his critique of the staff report, which you have in your packet. That staff report details how our current 403B and 457B benefit plans would be migrated from a single vendor to a multi-vendor model as directed by your Finance Committee. Mike's recommendations vary only slightly from the staff recommendations on this report, and staff is very comfortable with the differences proposed by Mike and Bolton Partners. Because of this comfort level and because each of you have had the opportunity to review the staff report over the weekend, Gina and I will not be presenting the staff report this evening. However, once you have had an opportunity to hear Mike's presentation and have held your deliberations, staff will need some direction from the board regarding next steps. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Mike for the rest of our time for his presentation and to answer any questions that the board members may have. Mike?
Okay, and Mike, before you begin, I just want to remind you, in case Chris didn't, your presentation should be direct and to the point. The board, I think, would like to engage you in conversation more than listen to you direct the report to them.
Yes, I would welcome any questions as I go through these slides.
Thank you.
Okay, again, I'm Mike Bezkowski with Bolton Partners. I've been with Bolton Partners for about 18 years. And part of my charge has been tearing these contracts apart for 403Bs and 457 plans and ask questions of the vendors in different ways. I also think it's really important to point out, I've spent a lot of time this year actually visiting many of these vendors. I've gone to see Nationwide, Mass Mutual, all the really big players, and I'm really becoming familiar with their businesses and so forth. So I'm going to go through my presentations, and if you have questions throughout, please feel free to stop me. But on slide number 1, with regard to the history of 403Bs, I thought it would be a really good idea just to talk a little bit about 403Bs. They're typically found in school systems and hospitals. And why they really started being reviewed a few years back was for hospitals and healthcare systems, the pension plan was typically the primary savings retirement plan. When organizations began, because of the cost, many organizations began freezing their retirement plans and using the 403B plans as their primary savings tool. And as we all know, in the private sector, a lot of the pension plans are going away. So as a result of paying more attention to the 403Bs, more organizations really started taking, more organizations started taking a look at these particular programs and seeing actually how competitive they are. So from a fiduciary management standpoint, they were rebidding the plans for fiduciary compliance because there is some charge for these committees as fiduciaries to make sure that they have the most competitive programs for their participants. And from a competitive standpoint, because you're competing with other employers, is the program that you have in place really competitive to other school systems and other employers in the area? The big change within the 403B industry, because these plans were rebid, was a move away from annuity programs. They were the first type of investments that were offered under 403B back in 1958. And with the passage of ERISA in 1973, plan sponsors in 403B could actually start offering mutual fund-based programs. And this was a big shift because in the past, insurance companies were the primary savings tools in 403B, and then with mutual funds, the institutional marketplace developed about 20 years ago in them when more corporations started to make them more like their 401k counterparts. So mutual fund programs are very commonplace in the corporate 401k market. Mutual fund-based programs become very prevalent in the hospital and 403B market within the past 5 to 10 years. So what many hospitals and other 403B plan sponsors found in these cases was that a single vendor solution was really benefit to them. And on the next slide, I've actually indicated what some of these programs enhancements were. Many school systems in Maryland, particularly 6 of them, have moved toward, including you, have moved toward a single vendor solution. Some of the benefits included, the big one, the speaker in the public comment said, fees was a really big one because in a single vendor solution, you're going to get your most competitive fee structure. There's also some other significant benefits. There's elimination of surrender charges. In these older variable annuity contracts, there was often a penalty if you wanted to get out of them earlier, and I have a chart coming up that's going to highlight that. You also have salaried representatives which is really important. They're being paid to communicate a program as opposed to selling a product. So the delivery of the mutual fund-based program from a compensation structure is a lot different as well. That's what we find again, you have an institutional plan, that's what we typically find in the institutional marketplace. As I mentioned in the report that I had sent out and delivered to the Finance Committee, as we looked at the LEAs in Maryland, there were 9 of them that I'm aware of that went through some type of process. 6 of them wound up in a single vendor. 3 wound up with multiple vendors, but nonetheless, they reduced the number of vendors that they currently had. All of these school systems, because I've had some familiarity with them, they all had what I call a group contracts, and that is the contract between the school system and the vendor. In the 403B marketplace, where there are many, many vendors, many of the contracts are between the individual and the vendor. And in that case, the school system loses its leverage negotiating with the vendor if the contract is just between the individual and the company itself. So one of the recommendations within the report that we disagreed with was the use of individual and group contracts. We're going to recommend only using group contracts. That's what we see standard in the institutional marketplace. There was also a comment with regard to the optimal number of vendors in the report as 5. We also disagreed with that. The 5 was the average that was found in school systems in Maryland. And as we looked at the numbers of vendors within each of the LEAs, some of the school systems did thorough reviews of their programs and others did not. So we felt that the number 5 was skewed high in favor of some school jurisdictions that really didn't do any type of review. Many schools, for example, in the Eastern Shore, have many, many vendors, and they've never reviewed their program. So what we thought was a more optimal way of looking at this is making the number of vendors a function of the RFP. And this is something we've actually done for school systems who have considered multi versus single vendor. In the RFP, if you actually give them the demographics, you can ask them, what is your proposal and pricing with 1 vendor, with 2 vendors, with 3 vendors, and then 4 or more vendors. And I would really let that drive the decision as to how many vendors should be used within the school system or to offer to participants. Many times you could say 3 because 3 sounds better than 2, but in an RFP process, the 3rd vendor might be have a significantly worse program than number 1 and number 2. So we make the function and number of vendors part of the RFP process. We also disagreed, I guess, with the recommendation to use what I called closed architecture and open architecture. This is the system whereby, I guess the architecture, the system, if you will, or the program where the vendors can offer different investment options to participants. In a closed architecture system, the school system really has limited choice as to the investment options that it can offer to participants. In a case of an inferior investment option, there is limited recourse with eliminating a poor performing manager. You have to leave it up to the vendor to actually make the choice. And in many cases, the vendors are very slow to remove poor performing vendors. It's almost, I like to call it shelf space at a grocery store. They continue to add options, but they never take away poor performing options. In the open architecture system, that's typically what we find in the institutional marketplace. That allows you the greatest control of your investment options. So we would recommend continuing using only open architecture solutions. This is the chart I was mentioning with regard to variable annuities. When we take a look at what's the difference between a mutual fund and a variable annuity, a mutual fund is an investment portfolio that pulls together money or resources from investors like you and me and invests it for a common purpose. The portfolio manager buys and sells different securities based upon the objective of the fund. The way that mutual funds charge is a percentage of assets, which is typically known as an expense ratio. Variable annuities are also investment portfolios. However, since they're issued by an insurance company, there typically is an additional layer of fees for an additional benefit. And this benefit is usually called a death benefit, whereby the issuer, the insurance company, guarantees the participant or guarantees the lesser or the greater of what's been contributed or the account value. I always like to say that, unfortunately, you have to die to get it. And when we've done studies in the past of these so-called death benefits, the vendors rarely pay out these death benefits. Less than 1% of the contracts issued actually paid out the death, or the death benefits actually paid out. So it's something that participants are paying for year after year, but it's a benefit that's rarely utilized. So I like to say, with regard to variable annuities, are like a mutual fund with an additional layer of fees, an additional layer of insurance, in my opinion, that are rarely used. In the institutional 401k and institutional 403b marketplace, we're not seeing this product used at all. So with regard to the recommendation using both mutual funds and variable annuities, we would recommend continuing using mutual funds only, institutional mutual fund platforms. Sometimes variable annuities also offer something called a bonus credit. If you're listening to the radio sometimes, to some of the financial shows on the radio, they'll say, okay, if you invest $10,000, we're going to give you a bonus credit of X automatically. It sounds like a really good deal. But again, none of these companies are not-for-profit organizations, so they're making it up with regard to higher fees, or in some cases surrender charges, where your money is locked up for a significant period of time. If you want to take it out before a certain period, you're often charged some type of financial disincentive to do so. So in the institutional marketplace, there are really no surrender charges. So again, we really are advocates of the mutual fund-based solution. This is a chart I put together for a school system in Virginia that went from a multiple vendor to a single vendor scenario. This is the performance, this was the June 30th, of At the top are the three prior vendors who are offering variable annuity products. At the very bottom is the vendor that was offering an institutional mutual fund product. I guess my takeaway from this particular chart is if you take a look at the investment fees, which are in the right-hand corner under expense ratio, you see for vendor 4 under the Vanguard index, the expense ratio here was only about 4 basis points. When you take a look at the other variable annuity programs, you can see the fees are significantly higher. And fees really do matter. They have a significant impact on performance and the overall success on a participant's account. And again, in a mutual fund-based scenario, you're typically going to have lower fees than in a variable annuity solution. I'll go to one of the items that we also looked at in the report was the minimum criteria that would be put into an RFP. And what we recommended was to make sure that it's an open architecture solution. As I mentioned, it's an institutional-based mutual fund platform. And by institutional mutual fund-based platform, I also am meaning that these are mutual funds where the sales charge, if there is any, has been waived up front because you're leveraging the buying power of your group. There are mutual funds which are loaded. If you're an individual and you go to an individual broker, you typically pay some type of front-end sales charge. In an institutional mutual fund program, those sales charges are actually waived. So that is one of the benefits of staying with an institutional mutual fund program. We also are recommending salary-based representatives who are W-2 employees of the selected firm. So right now you have Great West as your provider. Great West is providing one of their own employees as the person who's conducting the communications. If you were to bring in additional vendors, we also would recommend that they would be employees of that particular firm. So if it's vendor ABC, then it's a W-2 employee of firm ABC.
Could I interrupt a moment?
Yes, ma'am.
On that point, why do you see the salaried manager as an advantage over a commission-based? Isn't there more of a win-win situation with someone who his or her income goes up if the portfolio or fund improves? And wouldn't that be the best way to go instead of a straight salary manager?
Not necessarily. Typically, if you have a commission agent, there's more probability that a product is sold that may not be appropriate. There is more of a chance for that. And there's also some potential financial incentive to put someone into a product that may or may not be appropriate for that person. So in the institutional marketplace, salary representatives are used, again, to basically because you're trying to communicate a program as opposed to selling.
But you can have commission that's not based on a trade by trade, but just on an overall performance of the portfolio.
I typically don't see in the institutional marketplace financial advisors being compensated on the performance of a particular individual's account.
Could a school district set that up as part of the RFP?
It could. In our RFP minimum criteria, we're also asking for the ability to provide on-site communications for a specific period of number of days. So in the past, when organizations have said, we need a representative out here X number of days, that's something you can put in the specs into the RFP. So if you really want somebody out there 30 days a year to meet with your participants at different locations, you really just put that in the RFP and have the vendors base their quotes among that. We also have a bulleted point about offering an independent third-party managed account program. Currently, this is a program that many organizations are actually starting to use to help participants manage their account better. And Great West has this sleeve, and some of the other vendors have this sleeve as well. And typically, this is through a group such as Ibbotson, whereby a participant at their own direction can pay an additional fee for an independent third party, usually Ibbotson or Morningstar, to manage their accounts for them. So if someone is not comfortable with selecting funds or not comfortable with selecting the target date funds, they can use this channel and have an independent fiduciary manage their accounts for them professionally. A couple school systems in Maryland, I think Harford County Public Schools has actually adopted that. And that takes into consideration not only assets that they have in the plan, but they can input other assets, IRAs, non-IRAs, into their into this program, and it could give them an idea of what their asset allocation should look like. So, and typically the fees, because this is an institutional program, are typically, they're on the lower side than they were 5 years ago. We also are recommending a completed SSAE 16 report within the past 12 months. This is an independent audit of the record-keeping systems. The ability to provide complete fee transparency at both the plan sponsor and participant level. And then finally, required adherence to universal plan documents governing both the 403B and the 457 plan. So what this means is there would be one plan document that all the vendors would be required to abide by. I think one of the, in some school systems I've seen, multiple vendors have multiple plan documents, so I would just recommend one document that all the vendors follow. And on that note, with 403Bs and 457s, I think it would be prudent if you offered a similar number of vendors in both the 403B and the 457 programs. This would make it a little bit easier for participants who actually wanted to participate in both programs. They wouldn't have to potentially shop twice for vendors. As for the advisor representation, again, this is going back to, we recommend that the board, or actually the school system or the vendors use their own captive agents, as we spoke with. And we also recommended that if individuals wanted an advisor to help them manage their program, you could provide them names of local firms or national firms that they could contact to have someone provide advisory skills or advisory services to them. So if they really wanted to go above and beyond what Great West was providing, somebody could be there for them. But this would be at the participant's discretion as to whether they use that or not. For the average participant out there, we really don't feel that they would need an advisor. If they do, it would be made available to them, but at their own discretion. And that really helps, as we took a look at this and we thought about this, this actually helps mitigate the board's responsibility, because if you went through an RFP process and selected advisors and there was something that happened that was unscrupulous, and hopefully it didn't, but that would put, because it went through the board, there could be potentially more liability on your side if something happened with one of the agents themselves. Number of advisors, we recommend that be a function of the RFP as well. So again, if you wanted the vendor to come out 30, 35 days at different locations, we could leave it up to the advisor. You could tell the vendor how many participants they wanted how many agents they wanted to be available to your participants. We don't think they needed to all be based in Washington County, which was one of the recommendations in the report. There's some very good advisors from each of these firms who could provide agents that come from different areas of the eastern part of the United States. We spoke about the plan document. And then the selection and monitoring of the investment options. We feel this should be done by a retirement plan committee. Many of these school systems that we work with in Maryland have this already set up, where an investment consultant comes in and periodically issues an opinion on the prudence of these funds and whether they comply with an investment policy statement. And then they report back whether you should retain or delete certain funds. In the case where you need a manager change or a fund needs to be changed, well, we feel that the investment committee should be able to have this ability to change investment options. Especially if you go to multiple vendors, it becomes a really big, large process by changing fund options from vendor to vendor. So we think the retirement plan committee should be empowered to do that. Some additional observations: we recommend rebidding the 403B and the 457 plans every 5 years. Although this is a tedious process, there are some significant changes in pricing that occurs in the marketplace and from time to time, and it really helps protect you as fiduciaries going through this process. So if you've selected one firm, two firms, three firms, or however many, and somebody comes back 7 years from now and says, well, why did you choose XYZ firm? You will have a more recent snapshot of where you stand in the marketplace. So again, we feel it's a best practice to rebid these programs every 5 years. Some additional observations within the marketplace: we're also starting to see plans move more toward what is called a zero revenue sharing arrangement. In your current program and in many plans throughout the United States, the funds that are used in the investment lineup actually generate revenue that goes back to the vendor to help offset their record-keeping costs. To the extent that some of these investment options generate different amounts of revenue, some participants may be subsidizing others. So if you had participants in higher revenue generating funds, they would actually be subsidizing the total record-keeping cost of the ones that are not paying higher, record-keeping costs. So what the market is going to is a zero revenue solution, whereby you're using the cheapest share classes of all the funds that you currently have, and then the vendor's charging an administrative fee as the required revenue they need to actually administer the program. And we think this is a best practice. The private sector is moving toward this, particularly because of the fee disclosure that came out about a year or so ago. And it gives you the ability to negotiate fees, I think, more depthly than if you were to remain in a revenue sharing agreement. So I would go ahead and, if you're going through this process again, to go through a zero revenue sharing agreement. And then finally, as I mentioned, the new fee disclosure rules came out back in 2011. And last year was the first year that vendors actually had to send this out to participants, telling them exactly what their fees were. As a result of this, within the marketplace, fees have come down significantly when plan sponsors actually saw what they were paying. We recommend, for disclosure purposes, that the vendor or vendors are able to provide in both fee disclosure at the plan sponsor and participant level. It's currently a best practice. And many vendors out there within the public sector marketplace have this ability. That's my presentation.
Board members have any questions for Mike? We certainly would be glad to entertain them at this particular time.
Great, thank you. Are there questions?
I can jump in, I guess. I really appreciated the report that staff put together and your participation from Bolton on this. I wish we had had this degree of a report when we first made or discussed the decision of going to a single provider from a multi-vendor position we were in. And I think that was really about 6 years ago. So I think it is time, too, as you recommended, to test the market. And so I think this is the perfect opportunity to go out there and see if some of the new regulations and the new transparency of fees and might put us in a better position than we've been. The one thing I've noticed missing from the report, at least I didn't see it, was how to gauge the performance of Great West. I didn't see a lot of discussion about that in here, and I guess when we have an employee come up and say, what about a survey, I would ask staff, have we done any type of customer satisfaction survey with Great West? In the 5 or 6 years we've been dealing with them, what kind of feedback has the office gotten from their performance?
I'll take that one. Since I've been here, we've not done any surveys to employees to see if there are any service issues of our current vendor. I know that we do receive reports from Great West themselves showing that as an industry that they've been high on customer satisfaction, that they've been voted by their peers as being high in customer satisfaction. We really don't get many complaints of Great West. I think the only complaints that we do get are just, I don't know my PIN number. Some of the basic questions. I don't know my PIN number. I'm not sure how to log on to the site.
So more operational.
Yes. As far as any administrative aspects of Great West, since I've been here, I've been pretty satisfied with their account management, the staff that's available to us that's labeled to our account. So far it's gone really well.
My understanding with Great West is they were new to the mutual fund market when the federal regs changed and everyone sort of started rushing into this field. They were more of an annuity-based vendor, and my concern has always been, did they come into here trying to perform a service and provide a product that they were still pretty new in the market. I don't know if anyone here can address that or not.
Oh, yes, I can address that. I mean, we've actually, for a number of plans back in the mid to late 90s, we put their mutual fund-based product in their 403B plan. So there were a couple hospitals that actually, they transferred their 403Bs to Great West, and Great West offered a mutual fund-based platform.
What year was that?
1996, 1997.
So they've been in
They've-
mutual funds
yeah.
a little. I was thinking they were mostly annuity-based rather than mutual funds.
Right, they have annuity products out there that preceded their mutual fund-based
That
product.
preceded.
But as, I would just, the last comment I would offer on that is, throughout the, we do the search process for clients all the time. I'm really comfortable that they have experience offering a institutional mutual fund program.
The other thing, when I don't hear a past performance on Great West, when you look at doing something like there's that map-over process when you do the fund-to-fund. You take your existing incumbent funds and you try to do that match.
Mhm.
And it's usually done very methodically, and the process is set up so the actual pushing of the button is done over a weekend when the markets are closed and that sort of thing. Did we get any results as to how that map over performance, any type of rating as to how Great West handled that? Did staff track that? Because that's the spot where you can get some real problems with changing from vendor to vendor.
Not that I recall that. You're speaking of when we went to Great West 5, 6 years ago?
Well, each of our individual participants should have been contacted by someone from Great West to develop a map-over plan or process from their existing vendors to a match. They were supposed to try to match it for them. Now, I assume that Great West went out to all the participants and assessed what they already had and said, this is our recommendation for the map-over? So
I do not know the answer to that question, Ms. Brightman. We can research that for you, but at this particular time,
because that's the point where you lose some money.
Right, I would think that, I'm sorry if I'm...
Well, as you recall, when we discussed participation in the past, and I believe you may have been on the Finance Committee when we did, one of the reasons that we did not experience the level of participation in Great West for the first several years was Great West was advising folks to let those surrender charges run out. Usually they run in a 5 to 7 year period that they have to run those out. And we've seen a fair number of those products that had previously been with our other vendors when we had the 7 or 8 vendors prior to moving to the one. We've seen those folks come in bring money in on a year-by-year basis as those surrender charges go away for them. So I was not in that situation, so I'm not sure whether they did that or not. I really can't say, but I can go back and see if we've got some folks in the department that might know that. This product was handled through the personnel department at that time, so we can go back and see what we can find.
I just think it would be helpful if we knew the performance, if we knew the track record of the vendor we had right now. At least it would help me inform. I guess one other, and then I'll pass it on to some other board members. One of my concerns has been the lack, or what I think may be a lack of comprehensive financial advice. In other words, I work for the school system. My husband and I have our own portfolio, and I need to be sure that I'm aligning all of our financial assets, and I have a real strategy behind this. And there was a sense that our employees could not get that comprehensive assistance or service from Great West. If they did, it was going to be at a much higher fee rate. Is that correct?
Well, go ahead.
Great West does offer, I guess it's called their managed accounts, where you can actually receive advisory services through them to let you know what funds you should choose. I think from my readings of notes, during implementation, there was some, maybe, I don't want to say miscommunication, but maybe just some misunderstanding that when the board adopted this single vendor product, that meant that local advisors could no longer advise on this product. I guess I should say that they can and they can't. They can advise, that you can take, and we have people on our staff that do it quite frequently, you can take your portfolio, whether it be your personal IRAs, your savings accounts, your 403Bs, defined benefit plans, and take those to a local advisor, and they can advise you, yes, you should do this, this fund looks good, you should choose this. What they can't do with the Great West plan or any single vendor plan is they can't actually physically make those transactions for you. They can't monitor and say, I think this, you should switch this fund, so I'm going to switch it for you. It's something that the employee then has to manually do. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Mr. Bailey?
You just spoke of the availability of advisory from the vendor, the present vendor. Is that with additional fees?
Yes. There are additional fees borne by the participant if they would like to use those special advising fees, special advisors.
One of the common concerns that I have heard regarding the program, and you can correct me if I'm misstating it, but that the service that Great West is providing as far as advisory is concerned is somewhat limited, that the representative is not in this area and comes here perhaps once a month or once a quarter or whatever, and there's an announcement that goes out that says that so-and-so will be here from 8:30 to 12:30. If you need an appointment, come and see him. And the people that are in the program are in the classroom and cannot come to see an advisor at that time.
We've tried to address that issue over the last year, and what we've done is, in our contract with Great West, we are provided 15 site visits. It might be something where we want to look at increasing those site visits and have him on site more often. But what we've tried to do with those site visits is use a few of them during new teacher orientations during the summer, so that new teachers are aware that this product is available and he can assist them with any rollovers that they may have from previous employers that they're at now. The other site visits we've been trying to use, that he will normally come to the central office in the morning, say from 9 to 12, and then we have him go out to a specific location in the afternoon, and he's usually at the location from 1 to 5. And that's been working relatively well. He's been having very good feedback and very good appointments and high scheduling when we've been sending him out to those locations. And normally what we do, he was actually at Potomac Heights Elementary today, and I think he was at Salem Avenue Elementary last Tuesday. But usually has been about once a month, and we will send him to a location and then notify anybody that's in those feeder schools as well, or any school location that's close, that he is available there for appointments.
Now, if you were to serve the people a little better, for example, and you're offering more site visits, does that increase the cost of the program?
It may.
I'm sure it would. Again, I could stand to be corrected, but I've heard numerous members who participate that it would be their desire to have someone in the local community that would be able to address their needs, their concerns, their financial plannings. That when they have questions, it's not an easy thing to communicate with Great West. The other at the same session, same information gathering, the people that went into Great West, that they had no other, well, they could opt out and go with another vendor when we started the program. But if they decided not to do that, they had such limited knowledge of what was going to happen. They made no selections. Great West makes the selections for them as to who is going to handle their money. Am I correct in that?
There are default investments that if an individual makes no selection, but just signs up, for example, and says, I want $50 of pay to come out of my check, but I'm not making a selection, then there are default selections based upon that person's anticipated retirement date, their retirement dated funds. And the contribution then does default into whatever the retirement date fund would be, whatever retirement date fund would be appropriate for that individual's age. But as Mike pointed out in his presentation, and I won't use the word advisor, the representative that we have from Great West is a salaried W-2 employee of Great West. So he does not offer advice. He offers basically, the only advice he offers is the logistical advice of, okay, you've decided you want to go into this fund, let me show you how to get your money into that fund. You know, he provides, as Gina mentioned, the assistance with getting you onto the system, getting your password. If you want to use the telephone system, you forgot what the number was or you can't find it, he gets that kind of information for you. But he does not look at your particular situation and say, you know, based upon your financial situation, I think Fund X or Fund Y would be better for you. And I think to piggyback on what Mike was saying a little earlier, the way our program is set up, it's really a piece of, it's not an individual's entire portfolio. It is a piece of that. As he mentioned, they may have the spouse may have a 401k or a 403b at their particular place of employment. They may have some old accounts that are left over from the days when you could have your own accounts at other advisors. And many times what people will do is go and contract just for the services of an advisor to basically take all of these and pull them into a financial plan for your retirement, as opposed to looking at Great West as your sole retirement product. Now, maybe some people Great West may be all that they have. I'm not saying that that's not true, but in many cases, there are multiple pieces of their retirement plan that need to be considered. That Great West may not be privy to all that information.
So I have a couple of questions. First one, what's the level of our participation of our employees who have either a 403B or a 457 account?
22% of our employees participate in the 403B.
So 1 out of 5 of our people are preparing for their retirement.
Well, not really.
With us.
Supplemental retirement. We
Right,
have,
right.
and the literature indicates that individuals who normally save in a plan such as a 403B, 401k, the average is 5 to 7% contribution. Those are plans without a mandatory retirement plan like we have, that takes 7% right off the top of your pay that goes into the Maryland State Retirement System.
So in Bolton's experience, public sector employees who have a defined or some other type of retirement plan, what percentage of their employees are also participating in a private sector fund?
I'm sorry, the question
Is our 22% high or low for other public employees?
it's average. So I typically see the participation rate for other school systems in the neighborhood of 20 to 25%.
So my interest in this, for the board's edification, is I want our employees to be retirement eligible when they're really eligible. I think we have a lot of folks who kind of look at their fund's performance and say, it didn't get me where I am, I can't live the lifestyle I want. I just want to make sure that our employees can make a good decision on that. That said, I'd ask a couple of other questions. First would be, what percentage of our employees, of the 22% who participate, are actually in the default fund? Ballpark?
I believe that might be in the report.
Well, and as you look for that, the reason for my asking the question is, I remember some time ago, one of the conversations that we got in as a leadership team was what's actually happening with that default fund. Who's managing that group of funds? And to the best of my knowledge, it was a default fund, and it hadn't been managed, hadn't been changed over a significant period of time, which led to the conversation, remember, Chris, of the fund advisory committee that we wanted to establish,
Yes.
and that's what led to this.
And I think that's what Mike was referencing
Right.
when he talked about a retirement, I'm not sure exactly what you called it, but a retirement committee that would, retirement investment committee.
So
that would
what
be-
what percent
that-
was? I'm sorry.
I don't know what percent are in the default funds, but I know about 80% of our employees are currently in the program where they're not using a managed account or an advisory account. So we can assume, I think a majority are in the default
Okay.
account.
And what was the performance of that unmanaged fund versus the managed funds?
Historically, those funds have not had the best performance. Over the past year, it has increased.
Everybody has. I
Yeah.
mean, you could fall off of a truck and make money in this market, but, well, maybe not, but some
Yeah.
people have.
Historically, they have not performed well, which was a concern that we were hoping.
And it really is a concern
Yeah.
for us. Okay.
As you recall, Dr. Wilcox, that was the discussion we had that actually precipitated a lot of this discussion.
Right.
Was that we had those funds on a watch list.
Right.
And when we got ready to pull the trigger on those funds and say, let's replace them with something else, we sort of looked around the table and said, we really don't have the authority to do that.
Right.
And that's what, that question then was what sort of precipitated this whole discussion that we're having.
And there's no competition for Great West to do that. They simply can let people fall into this fund and let it go. But if we had multiple funds where people had some choice to move back and forth, I think there might be, I believe there might be a better return for our employees. That's really kind of my personal come from. Now, I don't know if that's informed or is it not, but I think a more competitive financial landscape would make people attend to the performance of the funds that are offered to the employees, because people will move back and forth between them. Again, I could be wrong. I want to come back to... Go ahead.
Let me ask Mike, but my understanding is that once we would establish a fund group that we would offer to our employees, whether it was one vendor or multiple vendors, it would still be the responsibility for us to do the due diligence on those plans. The companies would not do the due diligence on those plans, is my understanding. We would, our retirement investment committee.
But I think
Or
that
whoever
as an
the
individual
board would vest with
investor,
that
but what's
responsibility.
changed, Chris, I think, and I don't mean to be argumentative,
No,
is
that's right.
that with the ERISA changes and the requirements that now exist for notification of your fund performance, we have employees that are going to be much more informed, and if they have options, they will choose to move back and forth with greater frequency than they would now, when they basically just sit and don't have any other options. I mean, if you're sitting today in the unmanaged fund, and you get a note that says, well, in this year, we had a 7% return or whatever it would be. What's your choice at that point? Because I think what I heard the Bolton gentleman say, Mike say, is, well, you could go to an investment counselor, and he could help you with making some of these decisions. Now, I'm taking a little bit out of context, but here's what I don't follow that both of you have now said. Most of the financial advisors that I talk don't do this on a pro bono basis. And so if I want to go talk to them about and I'm an employee in this district and have a traditional fund, I don't have all of the magic that you guys have outlined, but I just have one retirement investment. I can tell you, I don't think many people are going to talk to me about that unless I get some skin in the game with them. They're not just going to say, well, you know what, let's talk about your financial future.
I disagree, because there are many financial advisors who provide...
Well, you need to talk to my investment counselor then, because he won't do it.
There are investment advisors who just provide advisory services only.
For no fee. It's just a fun thing for them to do.
No, it's not for no fee. I mean, but they don't sell product. That's the difference. It's the difference between providing advisory services only and
Right.
providing advisory services and selling a product. And what we're saying is we prefer the scenario whereby the outside advisor is just taking a look and providing advisory services and not selling any type of product.
Well, I can appreciate that, but the fact is that if I'm just sitting here and I have a small investment fund, and I go to an advisor and say to them, whether they have product or not, advise me, they're not going to do it unless there's some fee. And what I would like to do is create an environment in which some of that happens on behalf of our employee without them having to go to that third party.
Well, that's the retirement plan committee that Chris was mentioning, because you have an...
Now, you know what, I don't really think that 4 or 5 people from the school district can advise me financially. I mean, they don't have the expertise.
But that's why you hire an independent third party to advise the committee and accept that fiduciary responsibility for issuing an opinion on the investment options.
Because we live in very different worlds.
Yes.
Well, I'm just saying, that's how, again, the institutional retirement plan marketplace, that's how these plans function. So there's a retirement plan committee, there's a consultant that issues an opinion whether to retain or terminate particular managers. And the participants, it's seamless to the participants, it's all done at the plan sponsor level.
All I can say, Mike, is that prior to my employment here, I worked for a private sector employee, second largest publishing company in the world, and it didn't function that way for me, and they bought in the institutional market. It didn't function where I had to run down the street and find a financial advisor to help me make my investment decisions. My company, which was one of the largest, as I said, one of the largest publishing companies in the world, provided through its planned benefits package the kind of advice that I needed to move in and among funds so that I was prepared to leave that company when I wanted to leave. I don't understand to this moment why we can't do something in a similar nature for our employees, which is why I hope the board will take this to the street so we can see what's out there. I'll just leave it at that.
Sorry, I had one last comment.
Go ahead.
With regard to whether it's competitive, you mentioned the word, Great West has no competition. Well, the RFP is the competition process, and that's why I recommend doing this every 5 years, and in some cases, make it a 3-year contract with 2-year renewable terms. So basically, the competition, again, is through the bid process.
I understand.
Okay?
I just think you kind of answered your own question. You said you worked for the second largest publishing company in the world. Certainly, they could afford to hire a company that would provide the advisors, whereas maybe our school system can't.
I don't accept that for an answer, but I think it's a good observation.
But I do agree that, and I was going to ask earlier, Mike said that if you go out for an RFP, you can request the number of days that a representative is on site. I would hope you could also request the hours.
Yes.
And have somebody here maybe in the evening sometime for our employees. And I think perhaps our decision isn't as much whether we should go to multiple vendors as stick with one, is maybe we just need to shop more often, and maybe we'll keep coming back to Great West or to one vendor rather than multiple, but maybe we just need to do it more often so that we can request the kind of services we want and get still a decent price and not have to incur a lot of additional costs to the school system.
Any other questions? I assume that the Great West representative was at the new teacher orientation?
He went to the orientations. He didn't go to the New Teacher Academy because he had already been to all of the orientations that we had previously when we sit down and go over their benefits package. So I think that was 6 of them this summer.
Okay, but the new teacher orientation, the new employee orientation where WCTA had a booth and all the other folks in town who were providing opportunities and benefits, they didn't have a booth at that event?
No, they did not.
I sent this question in an email ahead of time. What's the participation rate in Frederick County?
Frederick County is 56%.
56%. How
They
about
have very high
How about Montgomery
participation.
County?
Montgomery County has 55%. And,
Those two numbers are what give me concern.
oh, yes, definitely, I agree.
Because if we're at 22%, and I appreciate Ms. Fry's comments and the concern about the 600 employees who are a part of this plan, I'm also concerned about the 78% of our employees who are not in the plan. Because if we're not, something that we're doing in this county is not reaching those employees in a way that other counties are. And that gives me concern as I think to what Dr. Wilcox said, which is when one of our employees wants to retire, I don't want them not being able to afford to retire to be the reason they don't do it. Because if somebody is in a classroom or in any place in the system unable to retire but wanting to retire, that's an employee who's not going to bring their A game to work every day. And I think the low participation rate that we've got, and I have to take your word for it, Mike, if you say it's 20 to 25, across the state or the country, that's fine, but, and you would know better than I, but when I look at 56 and 55%, that's a huge difference from what we've got. And that, to me, is as much an indication as any that we need to rethink the way we provide this benefit.
I do agree, and I was very surprised by those numbers and went back and checked, and I thought, is this a component of us going single vendor? Is this something that did happen recently, just within the past few years, that our participation has remained flat? And the participation has remained flat. It's gone up slightly. But I went back to December of '08 to get the last figure of participation, or the number of employees that were participating at that time, to see maybe we had thousands of employees at that time that participated. And we had 837 plan participants our last month with a multi-vendor. And now we have 839. So I think it's not so much a component of who we have, it's just that we need to do better marketing of the plan and make sure employees know it's there, make sure that they know what they have available to them, because I don't think they do.
I think that's certainly right that they don't. I might push back a little too, because as you've all just explained to us over the course of this discussion, the marketplace looked very, very different in 1987 or 2007 than it does today, for all the reasons that you've explained. So there could be very good reasons that a multiple vendor then might not be properly comparable to a single vendor now. What we do have is evidence from other counties that are on multiple vendors. And at least those two, we see something very different. And I don't know what this magic sauce is that they've got, but I'd like to find it and see if we can figure out how to tap into it. Ms. Fisher?
I'm not so sure I would jump to the conclusion you did just based on those 2 counties. I would want to see all 24 counties and the percentage of participation and compare whether they have multiple vendors or single vendors. I can only speak from my own personal experience, having been a teacher in this county and having retired in this county. When I was much younger, just starting out teaching, I felt that I could not afford to invest any additional money. Of course, when I first started, we had a regular retirement system we were paying into, too, and that all has changed significantly over the years. Later on, as my pay increased somewhat, I never understood investments, and I never trusted investments. But nobody ever tried to explain them to me. And so I just never did it. And I'm wondering if that's some of the same problems that our present employees are having. Maybe they just don't understand them, maybe they're scared of them, and maybe we need to do something to enlighten them.
Would the board be maybe willing to sponsor some workshops for employees, maybe either, whether it be through Great West, be it through a local advisor? We could try to set up some things to just provide some additional education, some additional opportunities for our employees to better understand and grasp the programs.
Are there other comments or questions?
I'd like to just briefly, and not to belabor this, but, you know, investment and retirement, we're looking at Social Security right now, and Social Security was never meant to be the retirement vehicle of choice. It was meant to be an insurance policy, a safety net, and you were supposed to have one leg of that, and then you were supposed to have public or private sector defined benefit pensions at your company. That was the bulk of your retirement. The defined contributions, which are what we're talking about here, that was the opportunity pre-tax to defer money to accumulate assets and wealth. And if we don't give our employees not only the knowledge and the ability to choose and have some choices to accumulate wealth, then I think we do them a disservice. So I personally think we ought to test the market. I think we ought to go out and look for vendors who are willing to be competitive on fees and on service and on performance. And if we have employees that don't understand financial investment, then yes, I think we need to help them understand that. But I think we do them a disservice if we just sit back and let them go into default.
So, Mr. South, Chris, if the Finance Committee asked you to take this to the street, if the board concurs with that recommendation, your position would be to have Bolton help you to develop the RFPQ or the RFP with the modifications that Mike put forward that he outlined in his presentation. Would that be the thought that you would take?
If that would be the direction of the board,
Of the board?
that would be the way we would go.
Okay. I do think, Gina, you did hit on something. I think, for me, it's probably both. We probably need to prepare the RFP and be ready to go, but I'll defer, obviously, to the wisdom of the board. But I do think there's probably a need to, even in the interim, regardless of how this turns out, kind of step up our education program around investments and options available to people within the district. That clearly has to take place. As I sat here, social media is a wonderful thing. I had somebody just pop in and says, I've been in this system for 11 years and I'm just finding out about this now. So they're watching on TV. And so I just think, that person may have lived under a rock, I don't know, I shouldn't say that because they know who I am, obviously, but the point that I would make is that, there probably are some people who don't know, or there are also other people who don't realize the power of starting young with a small investment when it has time to grow and mature. One of the first things that I think of is, a lot of school teachers don't have discretionary income. They're really trying to put food on the table and take care of their young families and stuff. But even those folks, if they can invest $15 or $20, I know that doesn't sound like very much. At least it starts that habit of accumulating wealth. And if they know that they can put $20 towards something, so they have $1,000 at one point to invest with a mutual fund, in a year, that's a good thing. So I think we've got to start to build the education around that. But I'll defer to Dr. Harding and the rest of the board.
I would say too that part of a multiple vendor, I think, solution will help get us there, because next year or whatever year, if there are multiple vendors and that teacher goes to new teacher orientation, and the multiple vendors who have a presence in Washington County know that they've got 200 young employees who have their entire working life in front of them, I guarantee you they'll be in those booths saying, why don't you come and do your 403B plan with whatever company. I could be wrong, but I think that competition will help create the education. So I think the superintendent's looking for direction whether to move forward on an RFP for this. That doesn't mean we have to approve any contract, but certainly that would allow us to test the market in the multiple vendor model that's been discussed.
Why would it have to be a multiple vendor? Why can't we, based on what we get back, decide if we want to go with one or more vendors? Do we have to put the RFP out saying we're going to accept multiple? Or can we just put it out saying we don't know how many we're going to?
I think we need to define that to have legitimate RFP, and then we can always back away from it, but I think we need to have that. Would you agree or not?
I think what I heard too is if you put something out for one vendor, you're going to get a different fee structure than if you put something out with multiple. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you probably need to decide up front, at least put some
And
parameters.
multiple doesn't mean 20, it can mean 5.
But you can, if I may?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
What I would do,
Competition.
the way I would structure the RFP is to look at proposals for single vendor, 2 vendors, 3 vendors, or 4 or more vendors, and then report back to the committee, and eventually they can make a recommendation to you as to what direction. But I think you'd want that flexibility, and I'd also ask for some direction, because I presented some material on group contracts and also using institutional mutual fund-based platforms, which are part of the institutional marketplace. So if we were putting an RFP together, I would want to put in the specifications, these are the type of products that you would want to use.
And to the board, I would say I think the institutional-based, mutual fund-based products would be the direction that we want to go for our employees in the 21st century. I think the other thing that I would say is I do think that there are a number of other considerations that we'll have to make as we get forward, but I think by putting it out so that we know what people would pay to play in this environment, then we can make some other determinations about our capacity as a school system to deal with multiple vendors once we see what they bring to the table.
And I think I saw some puzzled looks when Mike was talking about 1 vendor, 2 vendor, 3 vendors. I think what he's referring to is to put out one RFP that says, give me your pricing structure if you are one of 1 vendor. Give me your pricing structure if you are one of 2 vendors. Give me your pricing structure if you're one of 3, one of 4. So that we would get, within the same response, we would get different numbers then that the board could compare and say, well, it looks like for our employees, 2's the right number, or 3's the right number, or 1's the right number, whatever.
Thanks for that, and I think that helps clarify for me. Is there consensus to ask the superintendent to proceed down that road? And if there are I know there are a couple other questions you might have, I think we leave it to his and staff's judgment based on this conversation and what you've heard to make some of those recommendations that would come back to the board. Is there consensus to ask the superintendent to pursue that route? Okay, it seems like there is consensus.
In relation to that, Ms. Fry asked earlier about a survey. I'm wondering if WCTA could do the survey itself.
I'll reach out to Mrs. Fry tomorrow. We'll talk about options.
And I would think if there's going to be a survey, I mean, if we're going to go out to survey not only the 600, I'd like to get feedback from others as well about what do you know about the 403B plan? When did you first hear about it? Have you heard about it? What are the factors that are affecting whether you decide to invest or not invest, so that we can start to get not only at the choices and fee structures for current participants, but also help us to understand maybe why some of the people who aren't in the plan, whether it is the education piece or whether it's financial or other things.
Let us talk about that.
What I'm saying is if we're going to do a survey, I think that needs to be a part of it.
And I think the threshold question is if we're going to do a survey. We'll talk about it.
Okay. All right.
Thank
you all
much.
very much. We appreciate it. Next on the agenda is old business, the second reading of revised policy IKC and IKF.
Good evening, Dr. Wilcox, Dr. Hardings, and board members. On November 5th, 2013, the reading of the proposed changes to policy IKC, which is entitled Graduation Requirements, and policy IKF, which is entitled Class Rankings and Grade Point Average, were approved. Since the first reading, a public notice was placed on board docs, and members of the public were invited to provide comments. No comments have been received. The Policy Committee is requesting the approval of the second reading of these policies.
Thank you, Dr. Marco. Is there a motion regarding the policies?
Mr. President, I move to approve the second reading of revised policy IKC entitled Class Rankings and Grade Point Average, and revised policy IKF entitled Graduation Requirements.
Ms. Fisher moves for approval of both policies. Is there a second?
Second.
Mrs. Brightman seconds. Is there any discussion? Mrs. Fisher, you have the right to speak first if you'd like.
I think we discussed this at some length, not only in Policy Committee, but among the board members themselves. As indicated, there have been no comments since our last time. We did talk about it briefly at the last Policy Committee meeting. No additional recommendations were made, and I think most of what has been included in here, added or changed, is straightforward. And I would recommend approval, second reading.
Are there other comments or questions? Mr. Ridenour?
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to amend policy IKC, and I would draw your attention down to the section where it says non-weighted courses, 90 to 100, 4.0, 80 to 89, 70 to 79, and so on. I would like to add and amend the policy to include 60 to 69 with a 1-point weight average, and then 0 to 59. Down where it speaks to accelerated weighted courses, again, the same change, 60 to 69. In this particular case, the accelerated would be 1.18 for that particular change from 0 to 69, and then 0 to 59. And finally, under, excuse me, under the section advanced placement weighted courses, again, 60 to 69, which would have a 2.0, and 0 to 59 with a 0.
So Mr. Ridenour moves to amend. Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Mr. Ridenour, the floor is yours. You have the right to speak first if you wish.
Thank you, Dr. Hardings. Fellow board members. Several reasons. This policy, as you can see, was adopted in 2001 or revised in 2004. I am not certain, having been around right at that time and teaching at that time when that change was made, I don't think I was particularly fond of it at that point in time, but I'm not sure it did what we anticipated, which was a push from the bottom up, that students would all of a sudden, because we don't have a 60 to 69 or what we used to call the D, would just for some reason automatically or supposedly work that much harder, that they would move up to that 70, 79 position. There are a couple other things that go along with that. The Common Core now coming in with the added rigor. It's going to be, I think, some time before our students really get a sense of where they're going, what they have to do. I think this gives a little bit more of a cushion. The other element in my mind is I think we have a hard time, and we're going to have a hard time, at least for the near future, of understanding what really is mastery. There may be individuals who are getting a 60 to 69 who have mastered a reasonable segment of that course material. And maybe the same amount as somebody who gets a 70 to 79 or an 80 to 89. I think it's going to be difficult for us to know, and understand, okay, this person has mastery, this person does not. And I hate to see a student penalized as a result of that. Further, I think we have dealt with this for a number of years, the 0 to 69, and there are associated costs with that. Credit recovery. I think Apex is the name of the program that we use for that. I think that would go down if we have this. And further, I did some research, and my humble apologies, I tried to get on the computer last night to put all this down, and for some reason my modem decided to be an idiot. But I did some research, and the counties that I got within Maryland was pretty easy. And I tried to say right around Washington County to see what everybody else was doing. Frederick County has the D. Howard County, Montgomery County, Allegheny County, Carroll County, Anne Arundel, Baltimore County, as well as Berkeley County. And I will tell you, anytime you complain about our website, go to Pennsylvania. It is not much fun to find your way around those particular websites. So I could not get the information I wanted from up there. But I think it gives you an idea that, the surrounding area, and to get some continuity, as we go into these courses and core curriculum that will, kind of play out over the next few years, that we kind of have the same type of mindset as the counties that are our neighbors. So I ask for your support on this amendment. If, and I'm not sure, Mr. President, and I should know it, but the proper parliamentary procedure, if there is a decision or if the board, it's the will of this group to delay this or table it for a couple of weeks or whatever to get some more input, I would gladly bow to the will of the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. A couple things. I first want to be sure that I've got the amendment correct. It would make, and just for the benefit of all members, to be sure we all understand, under non-weighted courses, the 60 to 69 would be weighted at 1 point.
Correct.
For the accelerated weighted courses, the 60 to 69 would be weighted at 1.18.
Correct.
And the advanced placement weighted courses would be at 2.0.
That's correct.
That's the first thing. Second, just parliamentary, since we asked a parliamentary question, as I understand it, we can, if it were the will of the board, entertain a motion to postpone action on this to a specific time, which would automatically place it at a specific point in the next agenda. But that's a motion that would have to be made, seconded, and then approved by the board if we were to get to that point. So is there any discussion on the amendment?
This is
Mr.
just a
Grunenbeck?
brief question coming from a perspective of students that when do you see this going to affect? Do you see this going into effect the second we approve the policy and then that's a change for the rest of the school year? Or do you see this coming into effect in the next school year, the next quarter, next marking period?
I think it would have to start at the market period, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do I want to see it wait until the following year? Personally, no. Would I be upset tremendously if we waited and started it next year? No. I just feel that it's something that needs, my personal opinion, it's something that I think we need to look back to move forward.
Ms. Harshman?
While teaching, always had a problem with the D being removed because I felt that it still gave the student the opportunity to pass for the year if he or she ended up with a D, but it did not completely wipe out his grade. So I would be in favor of the non-weighted courses. However, I have a little bit of problem with accelerated weighted courses and advanced placement. I was always told that in college, if you ended up with a C, it was the same as failing. So to give, especially the advanced placement, credit for something that is even below what college courses are considered failing, I think is too generous. So I would disagree with the advanced placement, especially possibly the accelerated, but I do think that we need to talk about this before we actually take a vote on it.
Thank you, Ms. Harshman. Are there other comments? Mrs. Fisher?
Mr. President, I also, if we would change this, would have an additional concern, which is not with this policy, it would be with, and I'm not sure the letters of the policy, but currently you can fail one class and still be eligible. I think if we change this to allow D back in, we might want to reconsider that also. So for that reason and the reasons that some other people have extended, I would like to withdraw my my motion and instead recommend that this be sent back to committee for further study of not only the things that have been mentioned, but of any other related policies that this might affect.
We have to act on the motion before we can...
On the amendment.
I'm sorry, on the amendment before we can go back to the original policy. So, are there other comments on the amendment before we figure out how we're going to... I'm sorry, is there a parliamentary question?
I was just thinking that we would perhaps want to consider tabling it rather than sending it back to committee, but we need to act on the amendment and then decide that.
I just had a question, and maybe this is to Dr. Wilcox. I know at an elementary level, we're moving toward a report card without letters.
Correct.
And I guess I'm trying to figure out how at secondary level, Common Core, alignment, are we going to be changing this whole system going forward? Or are we, would this be an interim change?
We have not had any specific conversations. I think moving away from a letter grade or percentage rank at the high school or secondary level will be much more difficult than moving at the elementary level. So I really wouldn't even want to hazard a guess at that.
Okay.
I'd just like to add one brief comment that the amendment as proposed gives that student who really has a horrible, horrible first marking period grade an opportunity to still survive. In the old system, you know, if you failed miserably in the first marking period, you were finished for the year.
Eligibility.
Well,
just in terms of a
just
letter
in
grade.
terms of letter grade.
Because you can only bring your percentage back
You
up
can only
so
bring
much.
it up
Right.
so much, yeah. You fail miserably, you're going to have to make 100% the rest of the way to get a
And
passing
realistically,
grade.
So the thing that this helps us deal with is another issue that's come up recently, and that is there is a disparity as how some schools handle the situation that Mr. Bailey just outlined. There are some schools that actually offer something called a floor grade, which quite honestly I'd never heard of before in my life, which means that you can only fall so low, even if you really just blow the course out. You can only fall so low because they don't want to take away the opportunity for you to be successful for the year. But that floor grade doesn't exist at all, in all classes or at all schools. So Mr. Reidenauer provides an opportunity for us to perhaps find a way to address that issue. So I think it's a conversation that's very timely.
Well, let me make the following suggestion then. If this is the second read, if we, and Tony will catch me if I miss something here, if we postpone action on this amendment until the December 17th meeting. We will still be within the 8-week period between first reading and second reading. The second reading will not have failed. It will simply have been postponed. We have a policy meeting next week where we can continue to discuss this particular policy, although we can't vote on the amendment at the meeting, but we can certainly, as a policy committee, have some discussion regarding the things the superintendent's talked about and some of the concerns expressed around the table. And we can also look at it, and I'm not trying to write your agenda for you, Ms. Fisher. We can also look at it in the context of the eligibility policy, which is still awaiting second read as well. That way we could bring all of them back on December 17th and consider them all together. That's my suggestion.
I'm fine. I have a real difficulty discussing this with eligibility. I think they should be independent of one another. This should be for its own merit. I don't think we want to get into eligibility and say, well, we don't want to make this change because it might change the eligibility policy.
No, fair
I think
enough,
that has to be in and of itself. I mean, I'm fine with that. The only thing, Karen, Ms. Sarshman, I would disagree if someone who got more than his fair share of C's. I took them with grace and dignity and accepted them as passing grades, when I was in college, and was more than thrilled for a lot of them. So,
I'm sorry, somebody just told me that.
I don't, I think if you go to any college and look, and you see final grade point averages, if somebody got a D, they got a D. Now, I will tell you that I know a lot of students who would, if they got a D, it was incentive to take the class again because it replaced it. So I would disagree with that particular point, and we'll go.
And I think another advantage of waiting until the 17th, whether we couple them or not, is a change like this. I would want to give another sort of extended opportunity, not only to hear from staff, but to hear from teachers and from some members of the public.
Well, most definitely bring it up at the next student government meeting.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And this won't change the implementation either, because the next marking period starts in mid-January.
Right.
So either way, it's not going to get implemented.
And the month, we got Thanksgiving in a week, which people will be disengaged or hopefully not engaged in school stuff and engaged with family and turkey
The AP
things.
classes might get you.
So is there a motion to postpone this until old business in the December 17th meeting?
Should Mr. Reidner withdraw his amendment, or will the postponement motion?
Well, if
take
we
care of
postpone
that?
it, then when we meet again on the 17th,
It's
what
still
would
open.
we would be back in the parliamentary position that we're in right now.
Then I'll move to postpone and refer back to policy. Is that
Until December 17th.
until December 17th?
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Bailey. Is there any discussion? If not, all those in favor of Mrs. Brightman's motion to postpone? Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. All right. Next agenda item is second reading of revised policy DJ, purchasing.
Thank you. And we actually have a few others that relate to that.
Yes, sir.
On November 5th, the first reading of the proposed changes to policy DJ purchasing standards, policy DJG professional service contracts, and the recommendation to rescind policy DJF purchasing procedures was presented to the Board of Education. At that time, the board approved the first reading of these matters. During the first reading, there was a question from a member of the board as to whether there was a need to modify the wording of section B11 and B15 of policy DJ to require that pre-qualified bidders and registered companies verify their credentials on an annual basis. I had an opportunity to speak to the director of purchasing, and she informed me that our software system has the capability to send out annual notices requiring such information from these entities, and that the purchasing department plans to make this a requirement that these entities annually update their information. Accordingly, it does not appear that there is a need to amend these particular sections of policy DJ. Since the first reading, a public notice was placed on board docs, and members of the public were invited to provide comments. We did not receive any comments. In the event the board approves the second reading of these policies this evening, we plan to take this opportunity to provide professional development to staff that are actively involved in procuring items for the school system to make them aware of the new changes. We would ask that the board authorize us to start implementing these new procedures as of January 1, 2014. Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve the purchasing policies DJ, DJG, and DJF?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenour. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Brightman. Is there any discussion? If there's no discussion, the question's on approval of the policies. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again to the team for all your work on those policies.
Thank you also.
Next item is new business, West City Elementary Design Development. Mr. Fite and Mr. House, is that right?
And Mr. Rowland.
I will say to the team from BFM, as much time as you've spent listening to us debate policy, anybody's got a policy question, I'm giving them your number.
Good evening. Good evening, President Harding, Dr. Wilcox, and the board members. We're here tonight to seek approval of the design development documents for West City Elementary School. Approval of these documents is an important milestone in securing state funding for this project in the next fiscal year and allows the design process to move forward to the creation of construction documents. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Fite and Mr. House of BFM Architects, who will give you a very short synopsis of the status of the design, after which we look forward to your questions.
Well, in order to keep this short, I'll yield to Aaron. So.
I'm going to do my best to make this short and sweet, and I promise that our design development presentation, there are really no significant changes since our DD update on October 17th. There have been a few slight modifications to the site plan, mainly with pedestrian circulation, and that is due to some of the grades. And these are some of the things that we are going to continue to look at as we get further in through the design, but we still have the same basic layout for the site with the bus loop to the east and the parking lot to the west of the building, with the building pushed up towards Hager's Crossing Drive and the play fields at the north end of the site. The first floor plan, again, we have entrances to the parent drop-off loop and to the bus loop to both the east and the west of the building. We have clear sight lines down through the corridors. We've increased the size of the lobby and the connecting spaces where the corridors meet. The IRC remains as the hub of the building that students will interact with on a daily basis. There's access to the gym and cafeteria direct from the exterior by the public to use after hours and weekends. And one thing that we talked about at our last meeting was the implementation of the collaboration rooms between classrooms. And with that, basically, as a reminder, these are just flexible learning spaces located between classrooms. It can be set up a number of different ways for different group collaboration or a couple students or a specialist taking a couple students in there. There's visual access between the classrooms and just kind of that step towards the 21st century school. Some other features that we've discussed before: the security vestibule at the main entrance, pass-through window into the reception area, and increased size to the health suite to add a third cot in an enclosed exam or treatment room. With the gym and cafeteria, as I mentioned, there is direct access from the exterior to the gym, so the gym can be locked off from the remainder of the school after-hours use, but they would still have use of the toilet facilities located against the corridor, and also direct access from the bus loop into the cafeteria, again, for if there's a before-after-school program here. The second floor consists of 3rd through 5th grades for Phase 1, and one of the features of this school is the IRC loft. The IRC is designed to be open and flexible. We've talked with different staff at WCPS about all the different ways that this space can be set up, even the use of, or possible use of mobile book stacks to be able to give them flexibility in how everything is set up. One of the features in this design is a pedestrian bridge from the reading platform and the stair across to the flexible space, or the reading loft. We see this as a design feature of the library, something that we can really incorporate into the design. And then there's also a dual access elevator, which can be accessed from the corridor to get up to the 2nd floor, or also from within the IRC to access the IRC loft. The Phase 2 addition is designed as a single story, and what that would allow is for pre-K through 3rd grade on the 1st floor, with 4th and 5th grade on the 2nd floor. And it would also allow for this, what we're referring to now as an encore courtyard, that a lot of the encore classes would kind of be situated around, be used for art or the IRC. With the exterior, we're just looking at the use of masonry patterns and other materials to reduce the scale of the building, so we're respectful of the neighborhood, but also try and give some prominence to the building itself, to identify that as a school and be a landmark within the neighborhood. And these are just some renderings that we've updated to show some of the materials and the use of materials to identify the entrances through change in materials, and then just a view from the east looking towards the west of the bus loop area. So with that, I will turn it over for questions and comments.
This is an action item, so is there a motion to approve the design development documents for West City Elementary?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Bailey. Discussion. Anybody have questions? Ms. Harshman?
I still have a problem with the layout. I don't like the idea of driving through the parking lot, and I don't like the parking lot in the front of the building. I don't know if putting an additional exit onto the street would eliminate the problem with driving through the parking lot. I just feel that's kind of asking for trouble with people trying to pull out and to move around. So with that layout, I'll be voting against this.
Thanks. Thank you, Ms. Harshman. Is there Ms. Fisher?
I just have two tiny little questions that don't have any bearing on approval or disapproval, but what, on the 2nd floor, there's a room marked ITN. What's ITN stand for?
That's itinerant.
Okay, and on page 6, there's a BA gym office and then another just BA office. What's B/A?
That's before and after school.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes, I have a question. I'm looking at page 6 of the document that I have. And the stage is also going to serve as the music room, is that correct, until the expansion?
That is the current plan for it.
So is there a way by which, and I'm looking at what's there at the back of the, I guess there are steps up to the stage, that's going to be enclosed so that music classes can be held when there are kids in the cafeteria, and that there will be a sound barrier that way? Is there going to be a folding door there, or what provision do we have for that?
There'll be some type of sound attenuation barrier, whether it be some type of insulated coiling door or folding panel between the stage and the cafeteria. And then also the plan for the ramp up to the stage. There's a door at the bottom of the ramp which would provide the sound isolation from the stage out into the cafeteria. So the ramp would be kind of an extension to the side of the stage, but it would all be open once you go from the door from the cafeteria into the ramp. It would be kind of part of the stage.
Thank you.
Mrs. Brightman?
Concern a little bit about the ownership and possible cost of intersection improvements and upgrades along Route 40. I know that Buell is a public road, but Sedgwick is a HOA road. So would like some clarification, and also whether these upgrades and intersection improvements, a second left-hand turn lane, whether those things have to go through State Highway Administration, whether we have some additional costs that just concerned about who's paying, who's stroking the check for some of these things.
Well, I'll let the architect speak to the state highway issue. But we have embedded within the budget $100,000 for off-site improvements for roadways. So we did plan ahead for that, and that is in the budget.
It appears to be enough to cover.
We believe so.
Projected.
Based on what we've been told by our engineer and architect, that should cover it. So, and I don't know if you can speak to the state highway approval issue.
We have asked the civil engineer to confirm that there is no requirement for State Highway Administration approval because the improvements are not at the intersection of Route 40, but it's the next intersection in. But with that, we've tasked them to verify that it doesn't.
It might be a real good idea just to.
Yes, we've already posed the question.
And I assume the MOU is regarding upkeep of Sedgwick and snow removal and so that won't come back on us either.
That MOU is in process. Internally, we're working out how we want to approach the HOA, and then with Mr. Trotta's help, we'll work that through and have that in place.
What is the amount square foot that the state covers for construction eligible cost right now?
The amount of square footage that they're covering?
No, the cost per square foot.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That they're covering.
They cover $225 a square foot for the building, an additional 12% for the site, and then an additional 2.5% for contingency. So site and building is $252 a square foot, and then you add another 2.5% onto that, and you get to around $258 a square foot.
And it looks like we're up to 268.
Right now, that was the math that you're reading in the ASDR report.
Right.
I think we're actually a little lower than that. I think we're at about $264 a square foot, still a tad high, and I'll let the architect speak to how they're going to control the budget. We've been having ongoing discussions about that. It doesn't go
I thought you might have, so.
Well, at this snapshot in time, we are currently about $250,000 over budget. At the DD stage, which is roughly 30 to 35% design completion, it's not anything that is overly alarming to us. If anything, it gives us a good benchmark of where we are at this snapshot in the process, and it gives us a good sense of where the costs are coming in at. Now, within the DD cost estimate, there are some hard numbers and there are some assumptions that are made in there. We can put hard numbers to doors, but there's an assumption made for hardware and so for things of that nature. So, and that's just an example. So we have our line of hard items in there, and then we have some budgetary items in there. And as we get further along in the design, we'll be able to rein in those budgetary items to get those to be more hard numbers. But this gives us a good benchmark of where the project stands right now and what we need to rein in, or what we think might actually be a little bit low in the estimate, kind of adjust everything. The site costs are coming in a little bit higher than what we've seen in the past, and so we've already been working with the civil engineer and with structural engineer at some ways to help to reduce those site costs, and at this point we feel very confident that we have items in place that will quickly bring that back down within budget.
So I just want, excuse me, I just, because there are people here, not who write headlines, who write stories, and I want them to hear that this project is going to come in, to the best of our knowledge, at or below budget.
Yes, that is correct.
It's just that we're at a part in the process where some estimates are being made.
And I'd like to add from staff's level that we are somewhat alarmed, and that the message has been delivered. And we also looked at the estimate and know that there's opportunities to find those dollars and to be able to reduce it. So we are too confident that we'll be able to get it within budget with not a problem, but we need to work hard now and get it there.
That's exactly where I was headed with this, Dr. Wilcox.
I'm sorry, but I had a heart attack.
We've heard that message loud and clear since day one, so.
I was going to get there. I guess two questions to this same point is, what are you finding that seems to be increasing the site cost? Because when we collectively with the commissioners looked at various different pieces, sites for schools, this one came in at one of the lowest site costs to develop. So what are we seeing? Is it that grade issue that's?
Primarily the grade issue. Where we've got a building that spans across, over half of the site, and we've got 14 to 16 feet grade differential from Buell Court down to Sedgwick. It's all a matter of what the finished floor elevation is, how much cut, how much fill, and so in the DDs, the building was located in a way that related to the parking and other site conditions. But now we're starting to take a closer look at, okay, if we take that building that right now is at a finished floor elevation of 602, and if we can move that down a little bit lower, how much does that save us in cut and fill costs across the site? So we're looking at the most opportune way to be able to, what they refer to as balance the site, so you're not importing extra material or exporting material. Yes.
Understood. And one follow-up, I believe, and I couldn't find the date, but I think Grimm and Parker did an analysis, and I think it was Antietam Academy, on a cost analysis of a metal roof versus a shingle roof, and they factored in replacement cost. And I believe, I couldn't find it in just 24 hours, but I believe they came out and the analysis said that a shingle roof was the most cost effective. I look at that single item and there's $200,000 savings in that one single item. The other big item I think would be light fixtures and lighting, and so an assumption is that we're going to squeeze those fixtures and try to get that cost down there, but I didn't know the cost, but that $200,000 for the roof, I don't know if staff wants to address the metal versus the shingle, but if you're putting a metal roof
I-
on, you're talking a 100-year roof.
I think
and
right now, we're planning on
we probably won't be doing education in schools in 100 years, so.
The plan right now is to bid it similar to Bester, to have a base bid with a shingle roof and an alternate for a metal roof. The life cycle cost analysis you're referring to from Grimm and Parker
Was that the
probably
right-
indicated that a metal roof has a better life cycle cost, but in terms of Bester, we're putting a shingle roof on because we just could not afford the first cost. So a shingle roof first cost will always come out ahead. But from an overall life cycle, the metal roof comes out barely ahead. And that is dependent on how long you think shingles are really going to last. Because manufacturers today will tell you a shingle will last 40, 50 years, similar to what a metal roof will warrant their roof for. As a person in the field for many years, and I don't know if Brent and Aaron can attest to it also, or what their feelings are, but I have trouble believing we can get that out of a shingle, and it will end up replacing it. And that affects the life cycle cost, the number of times you replace.
I think you can look at today's shingles, and it's not like what we had back in the 70s or late 60s. They're starting to streak already, with just the adhesive of the
The
tar
asphalt
is-
shingles
yeah,
on.
And there's a concern about that regarding the appearance that it's going to give to the building on the onslaught. So, but we'll be looking at that as we go into.
Well, if I'm
further
doing the
stages.
maintenance, I'd rather be on a shingle roof
Well,
than a
exactly.
metal roof.
Exactly.
And we've
That's
heard
a
that from our
personal
maintenance folks,
thing.
too. Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Fisher?
Since we've been discussing finding money to bring this back into the budget, didn't I read somewhere about a choice on the outside veneer that was more expensive? Going with sheet rock or the fake stone or whatever you call it, instead of brick, and brick would have been cheaper?
And we've pushed that in front of the architects too and questioned that, and we'll be taking a hard look at the envelope and making sure that we're being very cost effective there. So that question has been raised also.
Are there any other comments? Mrs. Harshman?
I have just a question about down at the roundabout, right across from it. What is that? That little jog?
That right now is part of the elevation change from the existing sidewalk up to where the building is. And as I said a little bit before, we're looking at being able to lower the finished floor of the building to be able to reduce, that right now is a handicap accessible ramp.
It's a sidewalk.
Yeah, sidewalk. So we're looking to lower the building to be able to eliminate the need for a ramp like that and put in some more sculptural or more aesthetically pleasing type sidewalks. So
Okay.
that is one thing that will change from the DDs to into the next stage of design.
Discussion reminds me of what my boss said when I was working construction this summer in college. Is dirt cheap, but it costs a lot to move.
You're exactly right.
Are there any other comments? I was the one who was paying to move it. It didn't cost him that much. Any other comments? If not, all those in favor of the approval of the design drawings for West City Elementary? All those opposed? The motion passes 6-1, and the student member concurs.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You bet. Thank you all for all. It's been a long, ongoing process, but I think you can sense that we like where we're headed. So thank you for all the work.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good holiday.
Thank you.
Next item under new business is the consent agenda. Ms. Freeman?
Good evening, Dr. Hardings, Dr. Wilcox, and members of the board. The first item on the consent agenda is for the purchase of gasoline and diesel fuel utilizing the Washington County government bid PUR 1234. Prices change weekly, and that contract establishes the markup over the wholesale price that is fixed for the life of the contract. The second item is to renew our bid from last year for school buses. We are recommending to purchase and trade 15 buses at the same unit rates that we paid last year. The vendor is Kane Neal International, and the total cost is $1,390,125. The third item is a purchase requisition to Xeris for the purchase of wireless arrays for E. Russell Hicks Middle School, South Hagerstown High School modular classrooms, and Funkstown Elementary School. These wireless systems will allow for wireless internet connections for new technology that was recently purchased for these schools under a grant. Media Center shelving and furniture is recommended to be awarded to Duron at a total cost of $50,996. They would be providing the same shelving that is currently in the library at Ruth Ann Monroe Primary School. The fifth item on the agenda is a purchase order. We solicited and obtained 2 quotes for the purchase and installation of a Clean Fire Agent fire protection system for the main server room and the mechanical server room at the Administrative Center. We're recommending approval of a waiver of the bid requirement against this purchase order to FireX in the total amount of $58,392. Have a bid for your approval this evening to create additional parking spaces for Northern Middle School. The additional parking will be located to the east of the school building near the gymnasium. That contract is recommended for award to David H. Martin Excavating at $74,643. And the last item for your consideration is a schedule of purchase orders placed to asbestos specialists for the collective removal and disposal of lead paint and asbestos that have been discovered in the Administrative Center during the renovations that are underway there. Those orders collectively total $463,421, and the greater majority of that expense was contracted as under the unit price contract that the board previously authorized for our on-call services for asbestos abatement work. Concludes my bids this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Is there, do you want to read the bids in and offer a motion?
Somebody can offer. Okay, no takers. Mr. President, I move to approve Washington County Government Bid Purchase 1234 for gasoline purchases to Petroleum Traders and diesel purchases to Cato Inc. at bid rates. Renewal of bid 2013-15 for 15 school buses to K. Neal International at $1,389,581. Requisition number 166644 for wireless arrays to Cirrus at $50,940.85. Bid 2014-16 for Media Center shelving, furniture for Bester Elementary School to Duron Inc. at $50,996. Purchase order KK 5971 for fire protection at the Administrative Center to FireX at $58,392. Bid 2014-40 for additional parking at Northern Middle School to David H. Martin Excavating at $74,643, and purchase orders for abatement work at the Administrative Center to asbestos specialist in the collective total of $463,421.
Thank you, Mrs. Brightman. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ridenhour. Is there any discussion? Ms. Sarchman?
I have just one question, Ms. Freeman. We voted on buying buses, was it a year ago or 2 years ago? And we, at that time, had bought some extra buses. Do you remember offhand how many buses we bought at that time?
Just so I'm completely accurate, I'll tell you.
Okay.
We purchased, there were 2 contracts. There was a contract that had a wheelchair lift bus. We purchased 1 wheelchair lift bus and got a net offset by 2 trades. And then we purchased 14 of the same style bus with 16 trades.
Okay, and at the time, how many buses did we have to replace? Because as I remember, there was a time that we bought extra buses, and I was wondering how many extra we had bought that were not needed at that particular time, and whether or not that was added into this purchase.
Mr. Michael is much more familiar than I am with the schedule, replacement schedule for buses.
Thank you.
I think because we had such a good bid price, we took advantage of purchasing additional buses. So actually, right now, even with the purchase of these 15 buses, we're going to run very tight on our bus schedule. Our population continues to increase, and our homeless population increases, our special ed population increases, so our transportation needs continue to increase. So our spare fleet is substantially reduced right now. So extra buses is not quite the right word, but at the time we took advantage of a good price.
Yes.
Is what I think you're describing.
That is exactly what I'm describing, and it was a good
We
price.
have a year, about 4 or 5 years out. We have 2 years in a row where 7 or 8 years ago we didn't buy any buses. And we're trying to figure out a way to stagger our schedule of purchase of buses to make it to that year for additional buses. So probably next year's bus purchases, we'll probably do a staggered approach to replacement buses and extend some buses for a 13th year, and then over the next 3 or 4 years, work our way to those 2 years where at that point will be 11 and 12 years ago we didn't purchase any buses, and then try to fill our fleet with additional buses during that purchase time without interrupting the general operating budget.
So are these all replacement buses?
These are replacement buses, yes.
Okay, and these all expired at this time, right?
These are all 12-year-old buses.
right.
One, yes, has the most miles, I think it's a little over 300,000 miles on one of them.
I think that's the point that I wanted to make, the point that Mrs. Harshman was getting to. Our buses are replaced on a 12-year replacement cycle. I think for members of the community, they probably don't know that we have that cycle in place.
Thank you very much.
And that's not our cycle, that's the state's requirement.
Thank you. We did have good bid participation last year, and King Neal did provide a very good price last year.
Yes, yes. Okay, thank you very much.
Other comments on the consent agenda?
Mr. Michael, how many additional spaces will Northern Middle have for parking?
I think it picks up about 24 or 5 regular spaces and 2 handicap spaces were required to be placed because of the number of regular spaces. It's a need we've talked about with the school for about a year or 2. I mean, they've just run out of space. You're out there anytime. If you're lucky, you can park on the bus loop during non-bus times. Beyond that, we have staff that actually parks up at North High, and we shuttle them down to Northern Middle School right now. The location of Northern Middle School doesn't allow for overflow parking at the adjoining high school like many of our schools possibly could do. So it's a very tight site, and it's a very necessary project.
It's been a need since the building was constructed.
Absolutely.
It's very appropriate to be doing that.
Are there other questions or comments on the consent agenda? If not, the question's on the approval of the consent agenda. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs. Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Next, we have the consideration of the first reading of a number of B section policies.
Good afternoon. The Policy Committee has been conducting a comprehensive review of the policy manual. They currently are reviewing the policies in Section B of the manual, which is entitled Board Governance and Operations. As part of this review, the Policy Committee carefully considered the extensive provisions in Maryland law that already address the duties, responsibilities, and operation of local boards of education, and the state law that addresses board member elections and the filling of vacancies. Based upon this review, the Policy Committee is recommending the rescission of 12 policies because these matters are already covered by Maryland law. And I will give you a summary of those policies. Policy BB, School Board Legal Status. Policy BBA, Powers and Duties. Policy BBB, Board Member Elections. Policy BBBA, Board Member Qualifications. Policy BBC, Resignation. Policy BBD, Removal from Office. Policy BBE, Unexpired Term Fulfillment. Policy BCAB, Qualifications Candidacy. Policy BCAC, Method of Election. Policy BCD, Board Member Superintendent Relationship. Policy BDDD, Quorum. And finally, Policy BDDF, Voting Methods at Board Meetings. Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve the first reading to rescind the policies listed by Mr. Trott?
Mr. President, I'm very happy to recommend the approval of first reading to rescind these 12 policies.
I'm happy you did offer the motion. Mrs. Fisher, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ridenhour. Is there any discussion? Not seeing any, I'll just make one comment. For all the board members, we had a very good discussion in the policy committee where we went through all these and with Mr. Trotta's help, checked to ensure that all of them are in fact covered in Maryland law. And it's a good first start at trying to lighten up the policy manual, but I think we're pleased that we've made the progress we have. We look forward to doing a lot more if we can.
I don't know if we'll ever make as big an adjustment as they did in the master plan, but we'll try.
We can have something to aspire to. If there are no comments, all those in favor of the approval of the first reading to rescind the policy stated? Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member concurs.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is personnel action. Ms. Francisco.
Dr. Hardings, members of the board, there are several personnel actions for your consideration this evening.
Is there a motion to approve the personnel actions recommended by staff?
Move for staff recommendation on personnel.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Is there a second? Mrs. Williams seconds. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of approving the personnel actions recommended by staff? Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0, and the student member abstains.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is miscellaneous business, future agenda items. The Agenda Planning Committee did meet today, a couple of items to make people aware of, my colleagues aware of. One is we scheduled a policy work session on December 17th that will address policy BF, which is the policy on policy setting, just as a chance for the full board to come together and talk about some of what we talked about in the policy committee, which is what should be our priorities for what kinds of policies we do want to take out of the policy manual, and to look at some other aspects of that policy. So that'll be on December 13th.
17th.
I'm sorry, 17th. We'll cover some other things here. On December 3rd, we'll have first quarter budget adjustments. Based on one of recommendation or request from Mrs. Williams, we'll be discussing the summer literacy program at the business meeting on December 3rd. And I think that's all I wanted to add. Let's see, I skipped board member committee reports, so let's go back to board member committee reports. I apologize. Mrs. Harshman? Policy? Not policy. Boy,
That's close enough.
Drinking too much water. Curriculum and instruction.
The Curriculum and Instruction Committee met on November 12th at 12:45 in the boardroom. We had a presentation on Number Corner, which we just talked about this evening, and we were invited to watch this at any of the schools and see how much calendar numbering had changed to number corner, and I think it's very worthwhile for any of the board members to stop in and see this in progress. I did manage to see part of one, and it was very informative. We also talked about the different naming and removing of some courses at Barbara Ingram and how they were changed a little bit. Some of the courses were changed in the titles and so on. So that led to a good discussion on how we unfortunately have lost some of our foreign language courses. So I hope that somehow we can work on getting those back and established. And other than that, that's about all we did.
Thank you, Ms. Hirschman.
You're very welcome.
Mr. Bailey, Finance?
The committee has not met since our last meeting. We will meet this time on November the 26th.
Mrs. Fisher, Policy Review and Development?
In addition to discussing and refining the items that we've already voted on this evening, the committee recommended 2 stylistic changes to the regulation for policy GDQ, which is Coaches for Extracurricular Athletic Activities, and we sent that on to Dr. Wilcox. We put policy EHC, Electronic Records and Signatures, on hold for some more information from technology. As requested, we added a definition of a non-traditional high school to regulations for policy LKD, which is graduation honors. And finally, we discussed policy BF, which is policy setting. Policy development is one of the school board's most important duties. And because our policies guide the development, the implementation, and governance of our educational and operational programs, we're recommending that the board hold a work session on this overarching policy, as Dr. Hardings mentioned a few moments ago. In preparation for that work session, I'm distributing copies of that policy and asking each of you to read them over and be ready to make suggestions at that time. It would probably be helpful if you could send them along to Mr. Trotta and to myself before that work session on the 17th. That's all. Oh, we do have a policy committee meeting on November 26th at 11 a.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Brightman, Facilities?
Facilities will meet on November 26th at 10 o'clock at Bester in the construction trailer. It's usually 10:15, but policy is compressing that time, so we need to move that up if staff's all right to 10 o'clock that morning. Thank you.
Mr. Ridenhour?
Yes,
Human
HR
Resources?
committee will meet the 26th at 8:45 in the HR conference room.
8:45.
Is that right? We think it is.
I know, but
It was established
I get that, but
some time ago.
sometimes it needs to be a little flexible. I apologize.
All right.
And I have some made, if it's appropriate.
Please.
The Legislative Committee met on Monday. We did pass, May passed their 2014 legislative priorities and their positions, and the hope was by doing it about a month early that we could get those out to our member boards, and they might help inform their priorities that they're setting as they meet with their own delegation. We've started an initiative where different boards, member boards, can come to MABE and ask for our support on legislation, either at a local level or statewide. And Charles County did exactly that on Monday, and they gained the support from MABE to take lead in soliciting bill sponsors and co-sponsors for statewide legislation that would ask that each local board develop an affidavit of residency form to be completed and signed by parents or guardians of a student who is entering the public schools, and failure to complete that truthfully could be a criminal misdemeanor punishable by not more than $1,000. MABE did support this, and we will be working. It is optional. It has not, it was originally brought to us as a mandate, and the shells have been removed, and we've put may in there in support of local discretion. But that may be something that our own quick response team may want to look over and decide if they want to respond to. Just one brief, emergency shelter compliance has been approved. The procedures are being worked on. It is going to be a fairly expensive mandate, again, from the IAC this time, and I understand that about 56 schools have been identified statewide. I'm not sure if Washington County has one of those schools on the list, but a letter is supposed to go out this week to all the local districts. This would trigger a process by which, if a school is going to be used for an emergency shelter, that it has to have a standby generator, and then you have to rewire. There's a lot involved in that, and evidently that has passed, and it will be moving down to us.
You'll have to get the Honda out, Boyd.
I thought Clear Spring High School was used as an emergency shelter several times in the past.
And that's what they're going to be mandating, so there may be an extra cost there. One other one, and then I'll close up. There is, last year, a bill was enacted, and we will need to comply at the time of design development to submit an evaluation showing that we've evaluated our new construction for the use of solar technology. And if we feel that solar technology is not appropriate for that specific school construction, we do have to submit a report supporting that decision. There is some concern. The power purchase agreements are not as popular as they once were. They become too complex, and problems with maintenance. What they're looking at is more ground level solar arrays rather than rooftop solar arrays. But again, that's just another thing we'll have to supply with all of our new design developments going forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Brighton. Is there anything from student government?
Yes, actually, we approved constitutional changes at our last meeting, providing for the creation of the office of a student member of the board intern, who will be elected the year before they serve as student member of the board, and then will attend at least half of the board meetings, essentially, and really just learn the process and get to know you guys so they can do their job better the next year.
That's great.
And we'll be holding an election at our next meeting, which is the Thursday after Thanksgiving.
That's great. Thank you. That's important information for us to have, too. We'll look forward to seeing who our next student board member is a lot earlier.
Yeah, we actually have 6 candidates, I believe, so it should be an interesting race.
Anything else from any MABE committees? Or no? Okay, we'll move on to miscellaneous business. One thing connected to things going on at MSDE, or I should say the state board. We understand that there are code of conduct changes that are going to be pushed down from the State Board of Education. We've also heard that those are not going to be put out to public comment before the mandate comes down for us to implement those code of conduct changes. I would just like to see if there's consensus that we as a board send a letter to the appropriate body suggesting very strongly that if they're going to impose such a change statewide, they really need to allow comment so that superintendents, board members, principals, teachers can all provide their feedback on what it is that they want us to, that they're going to force us to include in a code of conduct. Is there consensus to send that letter as a board? Great. Is there any comment or discussion on that?
The only comment is who we might copy that to, and I think beyond the task force itself, it might be appropriate to send that to the Legislative Review Committee.
That's a great idea. And we'll send it to our delegation as well.
Absolutely.
Would Pizzan be interested?
I think they would.
Kazam would benefit from that, too.
Yes, sir. Okay, we will make that happen. Board member comments. Mr. Ridenhour?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Mrs. Brighton?
Nothing this evening, thank
Mrs.
you.
Fisher?
I have nothing.
Mr. Bailey? Mrs. Williams?
I do. I would like to congratulate our student representative, Jessen Grunendijk, for being named Herald Mail Student of the Month. So congratulations, Jessen. Yay. And I brought you my Herald Mail to add to your collection. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We'll get you 1,000 more.
Paper your bedroom wall with those.
Mrs. Harshman?
Nothing else.
Mr. Grunendijk?
Nothing, just thanks, Mrs. Williams.
You're-
And I'll just briefly say I attended, at the invitation of somebody in my church, attended the 50th reunion of Boonesboro's class of 1963. Had a great time. But one of the highlights, and many of the alums who were there asked me to pass on the thanks of the committee and many of the members to Dennis Unger, who provided them with stacks and stacks of pictures of the old South County schools, of the old Boonesboro campus, and as you walked around the room, everybody was looking at them, reminiscing about what things were like when they were in school years ago, and a number of them said, please, please, please thank Mr. Unger, because he didn't have to do that, he didn't have to spend his time, but they were just so thrilled that they could add that to their stack of information. I have a copy of the book they distributed if anybody wants to see it, but it's, again, an example of a small thing that a member of our staff can do that can really brighten the day of people out in the community. And that's really what schools are about, is community. So thanks to Mr. Unger, and please pass along my thanks and the thanks of the class of 1963. If there's no further business before the board, we'll declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you very much.
Got that plug in there for